When I went to the supermarket, a woman pulled down my pants in front of everyone. She completely lost control with me, and I felt like disappearing from the face of the earth. But what happened next made her regret every single second of that humiliation she put me through. My name is Marcus Whitfield and I'm 34 years old. I work as a night shift supervisor at a logistics warehouse about 40 minutes from my apartment. The job isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me something I value more than anything else, peace and quiet. I've always been an introverted person, the kind who prefers a good book over a crowded party, the kind who finds comfort in solitude rather than chaos. That's just who I am, and I've made peace with it a long time ago. That Saturday started like any other weekend morning. I woke up around 10, made myself some coffee, and realized my refrigerator was practically empty. I had been putting off grocery shopping for almost 2 weeks, surviving on takeout and whatever snacks I had stashed in my cupboard. But I couldn't avoid it anymore. I needed actual food, real ingredients to make real meals. So I grabbed my keys, put on a simple gray t-shirt and some comfortable sweatpants, and headed to the Riverside Market about 15 minutes from my place. The parking lot was already crowded when I arrived. Saturdays are always the worst for grocery shopping, but I figured I'd just grab what I needed quickly and get out before the real madness started. I grabbed a cart and made my way through the automatic doors, mentally running through my shopping list. Eggs, bread, some vegetables, maybe some chicken if it was on sale. Nothing complicated, nothing that should have taken more than 20 or 30 minutes. I was in the produce section, examining some tomatoes that looked decent enough, when I first noticed her. A woman, probably in her mid-40s, with short blonde hair and an expression that seemed permanently set to annoyed. She was wearing what looked like an expensive outfit, designer bag hanging from her shoulder, nails perfectly manicured. The kind of person who looked like she'd never had to work a day in her life. She was staring at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, but I figured maybe I was imagining things. Maybe she was looking at something behind me. I turned back to my tomatoes and tried to ignore the weird feeling crawling up my spine. But she kept staring. I could feel her eyes on me like a physical weight. When I moved to the lettuce section, she followed. When I walked toward the dairy aisle, she was right there, always a few feet behind me, always watching. At first I thought maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she just had a similar shopping route. But then I caught her whispering something to another woman who had joined her, both of them looking at me and then quickly looking away when I turned around. Something was definitely wrong. I just didn't know what yet. I decided to speed up my shopping. Whatever was going on with those women, I didn't want any part of it. I grabbed milk, eggs, some cheese, and headed toward the bread aisle. My heart was beating a little faster than normal, that familiar anxiety that comes when you know something bad is about to happen but you don't know what or when. I've learned to trust that feeling over the years. It saved me from plenty of awkward and dangerous situations. I was reaching for a loaf of whole wheat bread when I felt someone grab my shoulder and spin me around with surprising force. It was her, the blonde woman, and her face was red with fury. Up close I could see the veins pulsing in her neck, the way her jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. "You think you can just walk around like nothing happened?" she screamed, loud enough that everyone in the aisle stopped what they were doing to stare. "You think I wouldn't recognize you?" I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. I had never seen this woman before in my life. I would have remembered someone this intense, this aggressive. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and steady even though my heart was pounding. "I don't know who you are." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Her face contorted into something ugly, something filled with so much hatred that I actually took a step back. "Don't you dare lie to me," she shrieked. "You're the piece of garbage who's been sleeping with my husband. I saw the messages. I saw everything." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I'm a straight man who has never been in any kind of relationship with a married person, man or woman. The idea that I was somehow involved with her husband was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that for a moment I couldn't even respond. I just stood there with my mouth slightly open, trying to process what was happening. Ma'am, I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about, I finally managed to say. I've never met your husband. I've never even seen you before today. You have the wrong person. But she wasn't listening. She had already made up her mind about who I was and what I had done, and no amount of logic or reason was going to change that. Her friend, the woman she had been whispering to earlier, had joined us now, standing slightly behind her like some kind of backup dancer ready to support whatever madness was about to unfold. Veronica, maybe we should call the police, the friend suggested, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who's enjoying the drama way too much. Veronica. So that was her name. Veronica turned to her friend and nodded sharply. Good idea, Patricia. Let's see how this homewrecker likes explaining himself to the cops. I couldn't believe what was happening. This woman was about to call the police on me for something I didn't do, something I couldn't have done because I had literally never interacted with her or her husband in any way. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to de-escalate the situation before it got even more out of control. Look, I said, holding up my hands in what I hoped was a calming gesture, I understand you're upset about something, but I promise you, I am not the person you're looking for. My name is Marcus Whitfield. I work at Henderson Logistics. I live alone. I haven't been in a relationship in over 2 years. You can check my phone, my social media, anything you want. I have nothing to hide because I haven't done anything wrong. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I was getting through to her. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, maybe doubt, maybe hesitation. But then Patricia leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and whatever progress I had made evaporated instantly. He's lying, Veronica declared. They always lie. They always have some excuse, some story. But I know what I saw. I know what my husband told me. What her husband told her. Those words stuck in my brain. What exactly had her husband told her? And why would he point her toward me, a complete stranger? Before I could ask any of those questions, Veronica did something that I still have trouble believing actually happened. In one swift, violent motion, she reached forward, grabbed the waistband of my sweatpants, and yanked them down to my ankles. I wasn't wearing a belt. I hadn't thought I needed one for a quick trip to the grocery store. I wasn't wearing underwear either, a personal choice that I'm usually not embarrassed about, but that in this moment became the most humiliating detail imaginable. There I was, standing in the bread aisle of Riverside Market on a Saturday morning, completely exposed from the waist down, surrounded by dozens of shocked shoppers who had stopped to watch the commotion. An elderly woman gasped and covered her eyes. A young mother quickly turned her child's stroller away. Someone, I don't know who, started laughing. The sound of that laughter cut through me like a knife. For a moment, time seemed to stop. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, frozen in absolute horror, as Veronica pointed at me and started screaming again. See? See what kind of person he is? Walking around without underwear like some kind of pervert. This is the kind of man who goes after other women's husbands. The logic made absolutely no sense. What did my underwear choices have to do with anything? But logic had left the building a long time ago. This was pure chaos, pure humiliation, and I was trapped in the center of it with nowhere to hide. I finally managed to pull my pants back up, my hands shaking so badly that it took several tries to get the waistband settled properly. My face was burning, not just from embarrassment but from something deeper, something that felt like shame mixed with rage mixed with a desperate desire to simply cease to exist. You're insane, I heard myself say, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, hollow and distant. You just assaulted me in front of all these people. Veronica laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the aisle. Assaulted you? Please. You're lucky I didn't do worse. You deserve worse for what you did to my family. I wanted to scream at her that I hadn't done anything, that she had the wrong person, that this whole nightmare was based on some horrible mistake. But what was the point? She wasn't going to believe me. She had already constructed her own version of reality, and I was the villain in her story no matter what I said. A store employee finally appeared, a young guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Excuse me, is there a problem here? Yes, there's a problem, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice had become. This woman just physically assaulted me. She pulled down my pants in front of everyone. I want to speak to your manager and I want to file a report. Veronica's expression flickered for just a moment. Maybe she was finally realizing that her actions might have consequences. But then Patricia grabbed her arm and whispered something urgent in her ear, and the two of them started backing away. This isn't over, Veronica hissed at me. I know who you are and I know what you did. You'll pay for destroying my marriage. And then they were gone, disappearing down the aisle and presumably out of the store, leaving me standing there surrounded by gawking strangers and a very confused employee. The manager arrived a few minutes later, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Chin according to her name tag. She listened to my account of what happened with a professional expression that didn't reveal much of what she was thinking. When I finished, she assured me that they would review the security footage and cooperate fully with any police investigation. Police. Right. I needed to call the police. I stepped outside the store, my grocery shopping completely forgotten, and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher was calm and efficient, asking questions that I answered as best I could through the fog of shock that had settled over my brain. Yes, I wanted to report an assault. No, I didn't know the woman personally. Yes, there were witnesses. Yes, there was security footage. An officer arrived about 20 minutes later. His name was Derek Morrison, a large black man with kind eyes and a patient demeanor that immediately put me somewhat at ease. He took my statement thoroughly, asking clarifying questions and taking notes in a small notebook that seemed almost comically old-fashioned. So you're telling me you've never met this woman or her husband before today? Officer Morrison asked. Never, I confirmed. I have no idea who she is or why she thinks I'm involved with her husband. It's completely insane. He nodded slowly. It does sound like a case of mistaken identity. Unfortunately, it happens more often than you'd think. People get worked up, they see what they want to see, and innocent people get caught in the crossfire. She didn't just accuse me, I said, feeling the anger rising again. She sexually assaulted me. She pulled my pants down in front of dozens of people. I was completely exposed. That's not just mistaken identity, that's a crime. Officer Morrison met my eyes directly. You're absolutely right. And we're going to treat it as such. I'll need to get the security footage from the store, and I'll need contact information for any witnesses you might have noticed. With your permission, I'd also like to take some photos of any physical evidence, like marks on your waistband or any scratches on your skin. I appreciated that he was taking this seriously. I'd heard too many stories about male victims of assault being dismissed or laughed at, told to man up or stop being dramatic. But Officer Morrison treated me with the same respect and professionalism that I imagine any victim deserves. The next few hours were a blur of paperwork and procedures. I gave my official statement at the police station, signed various forms, and provided every piece of information I could think of that might help identify Veronica and Patricia. I didn't know their last names or where they lived, but I had clear memories of what they looked like, what they were wearing, and every word they had said to me. We'll review the footage and run their images through our systems, Officer Morrison told me as I was getting ready to leave. If they've had any prior interactions with law enforcement, we might be able to identify them pretty quickly. And even if not, someone who acts this boldly in public usually isn't a first-time offender. I thanked him and drove home in a daze. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door, smaller somehow, less safe. I kept replaying the incident in my mind, going over every detail, trying to understand how a simple trip to the grocery store had turned into one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the people in that store, their shock, their judgment, their laughter. I saw Veronica's twisted expression of hatred, heard her voice screaming accusations that had no basis in reality. I felt the cold air on my exposed skin, the burning shame spreading through my entire body. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I wasn't going to hide in my apartment and let Veronica and Patricia get away with what they had done. I was going to fight back, and I was going to win. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best civil rights attorney in the city, a woman named Gabrielle Foster who had a reputation for taking on difficult cases and winning them. Her consultation fee alone was more than I made in a week, but I didn't care. This was worth it. Gabrielle listened to my story with the focused attention of someone who had heard hundreds of similar tales but still cared about each one individually. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "You have a strong case," she said. "Sexual assault, public humiliation, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. If we can identify these women, we can pursue criminal charges and civil damages. The security footage will be crucial." "What about the husband?" I asked. Veronica said her husband told her something, pointed her toward me somehow. If he deliberately gave her false information that led to this, shouldn't he be held accountable too? Gabrielle smiled, a sharp expression that reminded me of a shark sensing blood. "Absolutely. If we can prove that the husband knowingly provided false information to his wife that resulted in your assault, he could be liable as well. Conspiracy, perhaps. At minimum, he shares responsibility for the outcome of his actions." Over the next few weeks, the investigation progressed faster than I expected. The security footage was crystal clear, showing every moment of the assault in painful detail. It also captured Veronica's license plate when she left the parking lot, which allowed the police to identify her as Veronica Ashford, wife of real estate developer Nathaniel Ashford. The name Nathaniel Ashford rang a bell. I Googled him and immediately understood why. He was a moderately successful businessman who had been in the local news several times, mostly for charity events and business deals. His face was familiar in that vague way that local celebrities sometimes are, the kind of person you might recognize from a billboard or a newspaper article without ever having met them personally. I had definitely never met him. I had definitely never interacted with him in any way. So why had his wife been so convinced that I was sleeping with him? The answer came a few days later when Officer Morrison called with an update. "We interviewed Nathaniel Ashford," he said. "He admitted that he's been having an affair, but not with you. The person he's been seeing is a man named Marcus Webb, who apparently looks somewhat similar to you. Same first name, similar build, similar coloring. Marcus Webb. Another Marcus. A man who superficially resembled me enough that a jealous, enraged wife could mistake one for the other. So she saw the name Marcus in his phone, maybe saw a photo from a distance, and jumped to the wrong conclusion," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "That's our working theory," Officer Morrison confirmed. Mr. Ashford showed his wife some text messages but apparently tried to obscure the last name. She did her own digging, found a Marcus who matched the general description, and convinced herself she had found the right person. And then she hunted me down and assaulted me in public. Yes. Based on nothing but a first name and a vague physical similarity. I felt sick. My entire ordeal, all the humiliation and trauma and sleepless nights, had happened because some cheating businessman had a lover with the same first name as me and his wife couldn't tell us apart. What happens now? I asked. Well, we've charged Mrs. Ashford with sexual assault and public indecency. Her friend Patricia Mullins has been charged as an accessory. They'll both be arraigned next week. What about Nathaniel Ashford? He's the reason any of this happened. Officer Morrison paused. That's more complicated from a criminal standpoint. He didn't directly participate in the assault, and his wife's actions, while perhaps predictable, weren't something he explicitly instructed her to do. But your lawyer might have better options on the civil side. He was right. Gabrielle was ecstatic when I told her about the Nathaniel Ashford connection. This is perfect, she said. We can now prove a clear chain of causation. Nathaniel Ashford conducted an affair. He carelessly or deliberately allowed his wife to discover partial information that led her to the wrong person, and that person, you, suffered severe damages as a result. He's absolutely liable. The civil lawsuit was filed the following week. We named Veronica Ashford, Patricia Mullins, and Nathaniel Ashford as defendants, seeking damages for sexual assault, battery, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligence. The total amount we requested was enough to make national news when the story broke. And the story did break. In a big way. At first it was just local news, a brief segment about a bizarre assault at a grocery store. But then the details emerged, the mistaken identity, the cheating husband, the public humiliation, and the story took on a life of its own. Within days it was trending on social media. People were debating who was to blame, sharing their own stories of mistaken identity, discussing the legal implications of what had happened. I had to disable my social media accounts because the attention became overwhelming. Some people were supportive, sending messages of encouragement and outrage on my behalf. But others were cruel, making jokes about what had happened, questioning why I wasn't wearing underwear, suggesting that I must have done something to deserve it. That last group hurt the most. The idea that anyone could deserve what had happened to me, the public exposure, the humiliation, the violation, was so fundamentally wrong that it made me question everything I thought I knew about human decency. But I had Gabrielle, and I had Officer Morrison, and I had a growing support network of friends and family who rallied around me during the darkest days. My sister Miranda flew in from Seattle to stay with me for a week. My best friend Carlos checked in every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, just to make sure I was okay. My co-workers at Henderson Logistics organized a meal train so I wouldn't have to worry about cooking while dealing with everything else. The criminal trial happened first. Veronica Ashford was found guilty of sexual assault and sentenced to 18 months in prison plus 5 years of probation. Patricia Mullins received a lesser sentence of 6 months plus probation for her role in the incident. The judge was particularly harsh in her comments during sentencing, calling Veronica's actions a shocking display of vigilante justice gone horribly wrong, and noting that the defendant showed no remorse for the devastating impact her choices had on an innocent man. Veronica cried when the verdict was read. She cried even harder when the sentence was announced. I watched from my seat in the courtroom, feeling a complicated mix of emotions that I still don't fully understand. Satisfaction, yes. Justice, finally. But also sadness, grief almost, for the whole senseless tragedy that had brought us all to this point. Nathaniel Ashford was in the courtroom too, seated behind his wife. He looked smaller than he did in his publicity photos, diminished somehow by the weight of what his actions had caused. He tried to approach me during a break in the proceedings, but Gabrielle intercepted him before he could get within 10 feet. "My client has nothing to say to you," she said coldly. "And I strongly advise you not to attempt any contact before our civil matter is resolved." Nathaniel retreated, his face pale and drawn. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he truly understood the role he had played in my suffering or whether he had convinced himself that this was all somehow Veronica's fault, her overreaction, her mistake. The civil trial came 6 months later. This time, Nathaniel Ashford was the primary defendant. The evidence against him was damning. Text messages showing that he had deliberately tried to hide his lover's identity, testimony from Marcus Webb himself about the affair, expert witnesses explaining how Nathaniel's actions had created a foreseeable chain of events leading to my assault. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a verdict in my favor. They awarded me $2.3 million in damages, with Nathaniel Ashford personally responsible for the largest portion. Veronica and Patricia were also ordered to pay substantial amounts, though their financial situations meant I would likely never collect the full judgments against them. $2.3 million. It was more money than I had ever imagined having. More than enough to quit my job at the warehouse, to buy a new home somewhere far from Riverside Market, to start a completely new chapter of my life. But the money wasn't really the point. The point was accountability. The point was standing up and saying that what happened to me was wrong, that the people responsible needed to face consequences, that no one should ever have to experience what I experienced in that bread aisle on a random Saturday morning. After the civil trial ended, I did something that surprised a lot of people. I started speaking publicly about what had happened, not for attention or sympathy, but because I had discovered during my ordeal just how common these experiences were. Men and women alike had reached out to share their own stories of public humiliation, mistaken identity, vigilante justice that targeted the wrong person. So many people had suffered in silence, afraid to speak up, afraid they wouldn't be believed. I wanted to be a voice for those people. I wanted to show that it was possible to survive something like this, to fight back, to demand justice, and to come out the other side stronger than before. I started a non-profit organization called Second Look, dedicated to supporting victims of mistaken identity harassment and assault. We provide legal resources, counseling referrals, and public education about the dangers of jumping to conclusions and taking justice into your own hands. In our first year of operation, we helped over 200 people navigate situations similar to mine. The work isn't easy. Every story I hear reminds me of my own trauma, brings back flashes of that horrible day in the grocery store. But it's also healing in a way I didn't expect. Helping others helps me. Turning my pain into something meaningful makes it easier to carry. These days, I live in a small house outside the city, close enough to visit friends and manage the nonprofit but far enough that I don't have to worry about running into anyone from my past. I've started dating again, tentatively, a kind woman named Sophie who works at a local bookstore and who knows my whole story and loves me anyway. Sometimes I still have nightmares about that day. Sometimes I still feel the phantom sensation of my pants being yanked down, still hear the echo of that cruel laughter. Those moments are hard, but they're getting rarer as time passes and the wound heals over. I often think about Veronica Ashford, sitting in her prison cell, probably still convinced that she was somehow justified in what she did. I think about Nathaniel Ashford, whose business empire crumbled after the scandal and who was last seen working as a sales associate at a car dealership. I think about Patricia Mullins, whose friendship with Veronica cost her everything, her job, her reputation, her freedom. I don't feel sorry for any of them. They made their choices, and those choices had consequences. That's how justice is supposed to work. But I also don't feel hatred anymore. Hatred is exhausting, a poison that hurts the person holding it more than anyone else. I've let go of my hatred for them, not because they deserve forgiveness but because I deserve peace. The woman who pulled down my pants in the middle of a crowded supermarket thought she was punishing a homewrecker, thought she was defending her marriage, thought she was taking righteous action against someone who had wronged her. She was wrong about all of it. And her wrongness cost her everything while giving me the opportunity to transform my life in ways I never could have imagined. When I went to the supermarket that day, I was just a quiet, introverted warehouse supervisor who wanted to buy some groceries. I left as something else entirely, a survivor, an advocate, a voice for others who had suffered similar fates. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the foundation for our greatest transformations. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up being the catalysts for our most important growth. Sometimes hitting rock bottom is exactly what we need to discover how high we can climb. I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone. The trauma, the humiliation, the violation, none of it was worth it in any simple sense. But I've learned to carry it differently now, not as a burden but as a badge, not as a source of shame but as proof of my resilience. To anyone out there who has suffered something similar, who has been publicly humiliated, wrongly accused, or violated by strangers who thought they knew better, I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know that it's not your fault. I want you to know that there is a path forward, even when it feels like the darkness will never end. Find your voice. Tell your story. Demand justice. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you deserved what happened. Because you didn't. None of us did. And together, we can make sure that fewer people have to learn that lesson the hard way. 6 months after the civil trial ended, I received a letter that changed everything. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from a town I had never heard of called Millbrook, about 3 hours north of the city. Inside was a single handwritten page that made my blood run cold. Dear Mr. Whitfield, you don't know me, but I know everything about you. I've been following your case since the beginning, and I need to tell you something that the police never discovered. Veronica Ashford didn't find you by accident. Someone gave her your name, your photo, your work schedule, your grocery shopping habits. Someone who wanted you destroyed. And that someone wasn't Nathaniel Ashford. Meet me at the Millbrook Diner on Saturday at noon if you want to know the truth. Come alone. Tell no one. Your life may depend on it. A friend. My first instinct was to throw the letter away. It had all the hallmarks of a scam or a prank, the mysterious anonymous source, the dramatic warnings, the insistence on secrecy. But something about it nagged at me, a detail that the writer couldn't have known unless they had inside information. They mentioned my grocery shopping habits. Specifically, they implied that someone had been tracking them, that Veronica's appearance at Riverside Market on that particular Saturday wasn't coincidental. I had always assumed she had simply spotted me by chance, maybe recognized me from a photo her husband had shown her. But what if it was more calculated than that? What if someone had deliberately set me up to be in that store at that exact moment? I debated what to do for 3 days. I considered calling Officer Morrison, showing him the letter, letting the professionals handle it. I considered calling Gabrielle, getting her legal advice on how to proceed. I considered ignoring the whole thing and hoping it would go away. In the end, curiosity won. I had to know. Even if it was dangerous, even if it was a trap, I had to know who had done this to me and why. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I know that was stupid, the kind of decision that characters in horror movies make right before they get killed. But the letter had been very clear about coming alone and telling no one. If there really was someone out there with information about my case, I didn't want to scare them off. The drive to Millbrook took just under 3 hours. It was a small town, the kind of place that time seemed to have forgotten, with a main street lined by locally owned shops and a population that probably numbered in the low thousands. The Millbrook Diner was easy to find, a classic establishment with chrome fixtures and red vinyl booths that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1950s. I arrived at 11:45 and took a seat in a booth near the back where I could see the entrance. The diner was about half full, mostly older locals who glanced at me with the casual curiosity that small towns reserve for unfamiliar faces. I ordered coffee and waited, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. At exactly noon, a woman walked through the door. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and nervous eyes that scanned the room before landing on me. She was pretty in a forgettable way, the kind of person you might pass on the street without a second glance. But there was something about the way she carried herself, a tension in her shoulders, a tightness around her mouth, that suggested she was carrying a heavy burden. She walked directly to my booth and sat down across from me without asking permission. Up close, I could see dark circles under her eyes and a small scar on her chin that looked relatively recent. "Mr. Whitfield," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming. I know this must seem insane." "It does," I agreed. "Who are you? And how do you know about my case?" She glanced around the diner nervously before answering. "My name is Elena Vasquez. And I know about your case because I'm the one who caused it. I'm the one who told Veronica Ashford where to find you." The words hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't speak, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at this woman who had just confessed to ruining my life. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "I don't know you. I've never met you. Why would you do something like that to a complete stranger?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was paid to. And because I was desperate. And because I had no idea what would actually happen. I thought she was just going to confront you, yell at you maybe. I never imagined she would do what she did." "Who paid you?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Who wanted me destroyed badly enough to hire someone to set me up?" Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "That's what I need to tell you. That's why I asked you to come here. Because the person who paid me, the person who orchestrated everything, it's someone you know. Someone you trust. Someone who has been in your life for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." The diner suddenly felt very cold. "Who?" Elena took a deep breath. "Your sister. Miranda Whitfield. She's the one who paid me to destroy you." The world tilted sideways. "Miranda. My sister Miranda, who had flown in from Seattle to support me during my darkest days. Who had held my hand during the trial. Who had cried with me when the verdict was announced. The same Miranda who had been my closest family member since our parents died, the person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. That's impossible, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I felt doubt creeping in. Miranda loves me. She's been there for me through everything. Has she? Elena asked softly. Think about it, Mr. Whitfield. Really think about it. When did your troubles actually begin? Not the assault itself, but the circumstances that led to it. The changes in your routine that made you predictable. The isolation that made you vulnerable. I thought back, trying to trace the timeline. Miranda had visited me about 2 months before the assault, her first visit in almost a year. She had encouraged me to be more consistent with my schedule, said it would be good for my mental health to have regular routines. She had suggested I start shopping at Riverside Market instead of the smaller store closer to my apartment because they had better produce. She had even recommended that specific Saturday as a good day to go because it would be less crowded than Sunday. Oh God, I whispered. Elena nodded grimly. She planned everything. She knew Veronica Ashford was looking for her husband's lover. She knew Veronica was unstable, prone to violent outbursts. She fed Veronica your information, making it look like she had discovered it on her own. She even provided the photo that convinced Veronica you were Marcus Webb. But why? I asked, and my voice broke on the word. Why would my own sister do this to me? What did I ever do to her? Money, Elena said simply. It's always about money. Your parents left everything to you in their will, didn't they? The house, the investments, the life insurance. Miranda got nothing. I shook my head. That's not true. We split everything 50-50. It was all divided equally. Elena pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. Look at these. Bank statements, legal documents, correspondence between your sister and your parents' estate lawyer. The original will left everything to you. Your father apparently had concerns about Miranda's lifestyle choices, her spending habits, her relationships. He wanted to protect the family assets by giving you control. The 50-50 split only happened because Miranda contested the will after their death and your lawyer advised you to settle rather than fight it out in court. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The documents inside confirmed everything Elena had said. My father's original will, dated just 6 months before his death, clearly stated that I was to be the sole beneficiary of their estate. There were notes in his handwriting expressing concerns about Miranda's erratic behavior and poor judgment in financial matters. There was correspondence between Miranda and a lawyer named Theodore Price discussing strategies for contesting the will. She didn't just want half, Elena continued. She wanted everything. And when she couldn't get it legally, she decided to take it another way. If you were publicly humiliated, if you were discredited, if you were traumatized enough to become unstable, she could potentially have you declared incompetent and take control of your finances. Or, failing that, she could at least enjoy watching you suffer for getting what she believed should have been hers. How do you know all this? I asked. How did you get involved? Elena's expression darkened. I used to work for Theodore Price, the lawyer who helped Miranda contest the will. I was his paralegal for 3 years. When Miranda came to him with her plan to destroy you, he assigned me to help. I needed the money, I was in a bad situation, and I convinced myself that I was just gathering information, that what happened afterward wasn't my responsibility. She paused, her voice catching. But then I saw the news coverage of what happened to you. I saw your face, the trauma in your eyes. I saw what my actions had led to, and I couldn't live with it anymore. I quit my job, I moved here to Millbrook to get away from everything, but the guilt followed me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. So I decided to come forward, to tell you the truth, to give you the evidence you need to get justice. I stared at the documents in front of me, my mind racing. If what Elena was saying was true, then my entire support system during the worst period of my life had been a performance. Miranda's tears, her comfort, her presence beside me in the courtroom, all of it had been an act designed to keep me from suspecting her involvement. Why should I believe you? I asked. How do I know this isn't another setup? Another trap designed by someone who wants to hurt me? Elena reached into her bag again and pulled out a small recording device. Because I have this. Theodore Price liked to record his conversations with clients, for his own protection, he said. I made copies of everything related to your case before I left. Including Miranda's explicit instructions for how to destroy your life without leaving any evidence that could be traced back to her. She pressed play. And I heard my sister's voice, clear and unmistakable, laying out in cold detail exactly how she wanted me to suffer. The public humiliation is key, Miranda's voice said on the recording. I want him broken, stripped of his dignity in front of as many people as possible. The Ashford woman is perfect for this. She's already convinced her husband is cheating. All we have to do is point her in Marcus's direction and let her crazy do the rest. Theodore Price's voice responded. And if she goes too far? If she physically harms him? Miranda laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. Even better. The more traumatized he is, the easier it will be to have him declared unfit. I've already started planting seeds with his therapist, suggesting that he has underlying mental health issues that could be triggered by a severe enough shock. By the time this is over, my dear brother won't be able to manage his own finances, let alone control our parents' estate. The recording continued for several more minutes, detailing every aspect of the plan. How they had researched my routines. How they had identified Veronica Ashford as the perfect weapon. How they had carefully constructed a trail of false evidence pointing to me as Marcus Webb. How Miranda had planned to swoop in as the concerned sister, taking control of my affairs while I fell apart. When it finally ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. The lunch crowd had started filtering into the diner, filling the space with noise and activity that seemed to belong to another world entirely. What do you want from me? I finally asked Elena. Why are you telling me this now? I want to make things right, she said. I know I can never undo what happened to you. But I can help you get justice against the people who truly deserve it. Theodore Price is still practicing law. Miranda is still walking free, still pretending to be your loving sister. They need to face consequences for what they did. And what about you? You were part of this. You helped them. Elena nodded slowly. I know. And I'm prepared to face whatever consequences come my way. I've already drafted a full confession, names, dates, everything I know. I'll give it to you, and you can do whatever you want with it. Turn me in, use it as evidence, whatever helps you get closure. I looked at this woman who had helped destroy my life but who was now risking everything to help me rebuild it. The moral calculus was complicated. She was guilty, absolutely. But she was also the only reason I now knew the full truth about what had happened to me. I need to think, I said finally. This is too much to process all at once. Elena nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. I've spent the last 6 months running from what I did, and I'm tired. Whatever happens next, at least I'll know I tried to make it right. I left the diner with the folder of documents, the recording device, and a head full of thoughts that threatened to tear me apart. The 3-hour drive home felt like it lasted an eternity. Every mile brought new memories, new moments with Miranda that I now had to re-examine through the lens of her betrayal. The time she had encouraged me to see a therapist, supposedly for my own well-being. Had she really been planting seeds for a future competency hearing? The time she had insisted on being added to my bank accounts as a backup, just in case of emergency. Had she been positioning herself to take control of my finances? The time she had cried on my shoulder after the assault, telling me how sorry she was that this had happened. Had she been laughing inside, celebrating the success of her plan? By the time I got home, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Miranda directly. I wasn't going to give her any warning that I knew the truth. Instead, I was going to do exactly what she had done to me. I was going to plan, prepare, and execute a careful strategy that would leave her no room to escape. The next morning, I called Gabrielle Foster and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment before speaking. "This is explosive," she said finally. "If these recordings are authentic, and if Elena Vasquez is willing to testify, we could potentially bring criminal charges against your sister and Theodore Price for conspiracy, fraud, and possibly even attempted kidnapping if the competency angle was real." "I want to destroy her," I said, surprising myself with the coldness in my own voice. "I want her to lose everything, just like she tried to do to me." Gabrielle nodded slowly. "I understand the impulse. But we need to be strategic about this. If we move too quickly, we could tip her off and give her time to destroy evidence or flee. We need to build an airtight case before we make any moves." Over the next 3 months, we did exactly that. We hired private investigators to dig into Miranda's finances, her communications, her relationships. We found evidence that she had been planning this for years, long before our parents died. We discovered that she had been in contact with Theodore Price since she was in college, that they had discussed various schemes to separate me from my inheritance. We also found something unexpected. Miranda wasn't working alone. Theodore Price wasn't just her lawyer, he was her partner in every sense of the word. They had been in a secret relationship for over a decade, hidden from everyone including Price's wife and children. And their plans for my money were just one part of a larger pattern of financial fraud that stretched back years. Theodore Price, it turned out, had been systematically stealing from his clients for decades. He would target vulnerable people, gain their trust, and then slowly drain their assets through a complex web of fake fees, fraudulent investments, and forged documents. Miranda had been his accomplice in several of these schemes, using her natural charm and apparent respectability to gain access to potential victims.